So we are in a series called The Judges. We only have one more week left, which will be next week. We've been doing this all year. If you've been around, you know we have been talking about Judges since January 1st, okay? We've been kind of coming in and out of it. We've had some other series along the way. But we typically study a book every year as a church, and we chose Judges. Now, last week, we had a guest speaker, Heather Semple from National Community Church down in D.C., Mark Batterson's church, and she talked to us about hearing God. So if you're like most people and you struggle to hear from God, you missed last weekend, you need to go back and grab that message. We were talking about Samuel last week. Some of y'all are like, wait a minute, Samuel's not in Judges. No, but he is the last judge. Eli and Samuel are the last two judges of Israel. They fall outside of the book of Judges. You're like, okay, well, you're out of Judges and you got 2 weeks left. What are you talking about today? We're going to talk about Saul. And then next week, we're going to talk about David and a little bit about Absalom. They're the first 3 kings of Israel. And what you'll see today really clearly, there's a reason we have tucked these first 3 kings into the life of the judges. Because though they aren't in the book, you see the themes of the book. You see sort of these men rise up into a position of leadership chosen by God, and you see them struggle in the same way that the judges struggle. Are they going to be good leaders or bad leaders? And so we're going to be looking at kind of some passages in 1st and 2nd Samuel. So we're going to talk about Saul today. For those of you who are newer to Christianity, and I don't mean this in a way to talk down to you, I'm just telling you, this is not the guy Saul who meets Jesus and becomes known as Paul and then writes a third of the New Testament, okay? These are different Sauls, and they live roughly about 1,000 years apart from each other, okay? So this is Saul, the first king of Israel, chapter 9. In 1 Samuel, we're going to read along here some different spots. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. Fast forward, a man of wealth. I just don't read the names. I mean, they're important. You can study them, but don't read them. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upward, what does that even mean? He was taller than any of the people. The Bible tells us that Saul wasn't tough to look at. He was a good-looking guy. He was handsome. He was wealthy. He was strong. And he was tall. All you ladies, throw your hands up, right? This is the guy you've been looking for. And it's the one that people have been looking for too. I mean, they have been asking for a king, and they want a king that looks in appearance, that's handsome, tall, strong, that's a man among men, just like all the other kingdoms around them have. God's been their king, but now they want a man to be their king. And it's complicated, but God finally allows them to have a king. And he's going to choose Saul. And he chooses this man, Samuel, we talked about last week, the prophet, the priest, the last judge, to anoint Saul as king. Now, I'm not going to have time to read all the scripture about Saul. There's a lot. It's pretty much the rest of 1 Samuel and into even the David story a little bit. And so I just want to encourage you, read it on your own, even if you know it well, because you'll kind of be refreshed today through the sermon. What I am going to do is walk through a couple key moments in his life. And in these moments, what you're going to see is you're going to see a man who was called by God to do an incredible thing. And you're going to see some trouble spots along the way. You're going to see signs of trouble coming down the path for Saul. And then what you're also going to see, though, at the same time as the character of God, you're going to see this thread of grace that despite Saul's trouble spots, God still acts graciously. However, though Saul sounds like a hero in the making from the description I just read, the only thing he makes of his life is failure. And though Saul has a great start, the signs of trouble overwhelm him, and he rejects the grace of God throughout his life. And he has a very poor finish. And though the people chose him as king, and God anoints him as king, God eventually rejects him. Now listen, some of you have had great starts in life. It doesn't mean you're going to have a great finish. And some of you have had rough starts in life, but it doesn't mean you're going to have a rough finish. What defines our life is not our circumstances, it's not our upbringing, it's not anything that we do. What defines our life is how we respond to God's grace, period. Now, things For some of you in this room, maybe a lot of you, things have been rough. Maybe you had a disappointing summer, maybe a disappointing year, and you are ready for a fresh start, and you absolutely need God's grace. Maybe you're in a relationship right now that's full of tension and frustration. You're not sure where it's going. You're not sure what to do. Maybe your marriage, it is a mess. Maybe you're a new parent, you can't get your baby to sleep, so you can't sleep. Right? Maybe you're traveling so much that you're thinking about a change, but you don't know how to make that change. Maybe you're in a leadership position and people are looking to you for answers to shape their life. Maybe you're suffering. Maybe your finances are a mess. Maybe you're out of work. Maybe you're all alone. Maybe you struggle with mental illness. Whatever you're in right now, you need grace. It's not our circumstances that define us. What defines us is how we respond to God's grace in our life. And you'll see this in the life of Saul. Now, we already read, Saul's story begins with him being ridiculously good looking, sort of a Zoolander, right, of the scriptures. And his only qualifications that we have at all are what? External. I mean, he's strong, he's tall, he's handsome, and he's got some cash. And this is why the people choose him. And so God chooses him. To the original hearers of this story, though, they would be reading this, and they would be hearing this story, and then they would turn the page, and they would begin to read the description of the next king. Who's the next king? David. Okay? Not related to Saul. And David is chosen, but not for what? Not for his external circumstances. I mean, he wasn't tall, he was short, he wasn't handsome, he was ruddy, he didn't have a lot of money, he was the last in the family, the last in the rights, the one way down the line, so he was a shepherd in the fields. Why did God choose David? One simple purpose. You know it. His heart. And so right away we have this contrast between the first two kings of Israel. Saul is chosen because he looks good. And he's like all the other kings that the people have seen. He's got it going on. But David's chosen for his heart. I'll come back to this in a moment. But here's the thread of grace. Despite how he was chosen, he is still anointed king. And then you'll see how God graciously acts. Listen, verse 9. He has this conversation with Samuel. He's privately anointed. And then at the end of that, it says this. When he turned his back to leave Samuel, God gave him another heart, and the Spirit of God rushed upon him. We have this contrast. He doesn't have a heart like David. God gives him a new one. And God gives him his Spirit. It rushes on him. This language of the Judges, talking about God empowering him for something he can't do on his own. This was all in fulfillment to what Samuel had told him, the prophet. He had met with Samuel. Samuel anointed him. Samuel saw him coming on down the road. And God said, hey, this is the guy that I've chosen for you. Samuel anoints him. Samuel speaks truth about who he's to become. And then Saul turns, and as he walks away, he's given a new heart. And he's given a new spirit. And why is this important? Because listen, if God has something for us to do, we are paralyzed until he gives us what we need to do. God has to empower us for the tasks he has ahead for us. Now, some of you, when it comes to the Bible, you think it's just a book. And I, and Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, think it's much more than a book, that it's sacred, that God breathes through it, that there's something special and unique about this that makes it greater than any book. It's the inspired word of God. But the Bible's also not less than a book. And what I mean by that is sometimes we forget that it's a book, that it's written as literature, that we have to approach it as literature. So I don't mean to nerd out on you here, and I'm no former English major like Dennis, but listen, there's some incredible stuff that's been happening in this story. Read it later on your own. There's sort of these little things, right? There's some language of the judges in Saul's life. This sort of foreshadows. Is he going to be like a good judge or a bad judge? Is he going to be like Deborah or Gideon? Is he going to be like Abimelech? We don't know, but there's all this foreshadowing. There's this simple where he walks away from Samuel and he turns his back on Samuel. And though he receives a new heart and a spirit, he's just turned his back on a prophet. Whoa, what's that telling us? It tells us later in life, though God's acted graciously, he's going to turn his back on this man of God and indeed there's this big issue of the heart and the spirit. We have this contrast between David's heart and Saul's heart. Saul doesn't have the heart of David. He needs a new one. So we have this sort of foreshadowing question. Which heart is he going to lead out of? His own or the one God gives him? And then he's also given God's spirit, just like the judges. What kind of judge is he going to be? A good one or a bad one? What kind of leader is going to be? Is he going to lead out of God's spirit, or is he going to lead on his own power and out of his own spirit? Spoiler alert, I've already told you. He's going to be a terrible leader. He's going to lead out of his own heart and out of his own spirit. Now, church, listen, this is what the entire sermon is about. God has something in this life for you to accomplish. Every single one of you. There's a purpose for you being you. About a year ago, I gave a sermon. You may remember this image that we put up. It was in our series called Prepare, and I'll refresh this link through the social media over the next 24 hours. So if you missed the sermon, but you may recognize this if you were here a year ago. We talked about our purpose, and we said our purpose in life, and we study it in the men and the women of scriptures and how they discover what they're created to do. It's all these things working together. It's what do people affirm in us? What are we passionate about? What circumstances in our life? What kind of desires do we have? What kind of gifts do we have? All these kinds of things. They work together to give us our purpose. This message is not about how you can discover what your purpose is. What this message is about is how you can discover some ways to not mess it up. Because listen, you have a purpose. God has created you uniquely. Nobody else has been created like you. Your passions, your desires, your good, your bad, your desires and dysfunctions, your gifts and gaffes, your hopes and your hells that haunt you at night. God has created you uniquely. And his grace has been given to you. And if you can allow God to change your heart and give you a new one, if you can allow him to replace our own broken human spirit with his spirit, you will be able to accomplish the purpose he has created for you to accomplish. But just like in Saul's life, the opposite is true. You can't accomplish without him what God has planned for you to accomplish with him. It's not possible. We will have to choose, like Saul, between relying on ourselves, our ambitions, our plans, our desires, and ultimately our own heart and our spirit, or taking all of that from God, relying on his ambitions, his plans, his desires, the heart he gives us, and his spirit that he gives to us. We'll have to make a choice, and the choice will have a consequence. You can't accomplish without him what God has planned for you to accomplish with him. The only thing that can make us ready for what God has purposed for us and created us for is God. We don't have it on our own. It's his grace to us, his gift to us of his heart and his spirit. Now, listen, back to Saul, the second part of his story. In this conversation with Samuel, Saul has this sort of words that are given to him. God tells him through Samuel, this is who you are, this is who you're going to become. But then some very important instructions come. There's a battle looming for Saul as the leader of God's people. There's a battle looming, and it's about a week away. And Saul kind of knows it's coming, and Samuel definitely knows it's coming. And he tells him very clearly, Samuel tells Saul, listen, you are to wait 7 days. Do not engage in battle. Wait 7 days. And at the end of those 7 days, I will appear. And I, Samuel, as the priest of God, according to his law, I will sacrifice. And then we will go into battle, and God will be with us, and we will be victorious. Wait 7 days. Don't sacrifice anything. That's my job. I'm the priest. Now, what do you think happens? Well, Saul waits 7 days. But the battle's looming. And his men, they're beginning to say, hey, Saul, you're supposed to be our king. What are you doing? Are you going to lead or not? We're going to get routed. The enemy's massing. We're going to be in trouble. You got to do something. We got to get in the game, man. And Saul's like, no, we've waited 7 days. It's okay. Samuel's going to come. But then he doesn't see Samuel. So what does Saul do? He makes a sacrifice. Now listen. He not only has disobeyed Samuel, he's disobeyed the law of God. The law of God has said, I'm holy. Everybody else is unholy. And I've provided a way for you to make a sacrifice, but you've got to do it through He's the king. So you know what he's thinking. Hey, I'm the king. God chose me. God anointed me. A week ago, I remember all the words he said. And I don't see the Gandalf coming down the mountain. You know what I mean? Lord of the Rings reference? And so he doesn't see Samuel. So he makes the sacrifice. And he just does it himself. And then guess what happens? Samuel arrives right after he makes the sacrifice. Just like he said he would. Listen, Saul's life could have been marked by being the man of God who was anointed, who has this special relationship with God, this incredible purpose, and his life could have been marked by the truth that God always shows up in Samuel's life just when he needs him. He always gets the answer at the right time. He always gets the action of God at the right time. He's so close with God, and he matures this over the course of his life, that Samuel, that God always arrives when he says he will arrive. His life could have been marked by faithfulness, him to God and God to Samuel. But instead, this is going to mark his life. And Samuel and God are going to be very unpleased. Here's the sign of trouble. Saul is so concerned about the circumstances around him, what other people are saying, that he throws aside what he knows to be right. And he begins to think, what can I pull off on my own? And what are they all looking for me to do? And listen, when we are concerned with I and they, we are at odds with what he can do through us. And it needs to be the other way around. What he does causes Samuel to prophetically blow up. I mean, he's going to get yelled at. And we'll read it in a second. But the heart of what he says back to Saul is this: what have you done? Verbatim out of the scripture. What have you done? I mean, we've all had what have you done moments, right? Moments where someone would say to us, what have you done? What'd you do? Right? And Samuel goes to him and says, what have you done? He's hot. He's upset. Many of you know I have an incredible family. My wife, Amy, and 3 kids. There's a shot of us at the Awesome Pirates game. They're making their charge right now, if you didn't know that. We're going to be in the playoffs. That's what I'm thinking. And here we are. This is a couple weeks ago, getting in a nice family baseball game. My wife, Amy, and I, we celebrated our 13th anniversary last week. Thanks to the 4 people that clapped. And we have 3 kids. Cohen is the oldest, and then Tavin and Penn. And for those of you who weren't here last weekend, we haven't put this on social media, but we're expecting number 4 in February, so a little Valentine's treat for the Melder family. And thanks, one person. Wow, that's awesome. Thanks, Angela. She works for me. I'm hoping for a boy, honestly. I think 4 boys would be pretty crazy and fun, but we'll be happy with healthy baby. So hey, listen, life as a parent is funny. I mean, you just kind of walk through it, and you have no idea what you're doing. You walk out of the hospital 3 days after giving birth. You've never cared for a child in your life, particularly as a guy, and all of a sudden you're in charge of a living, breathing human being. What am I supposed to do? Like, there's no instructions, you know. But one of the most amazing things that happens over the course of your life as a parent, and I'm only 7.5 years into it, is that you begin to learn a lot about yourself, and you begin to learn a lot about God and how He relates to us, because you are, for all intents and purposes, in the position of God with your children, right? And you're the one telling them what they need to do, what they not need to do, and you're sort of in charge of consequences and all these different things. And so I could tell you a million stories and fill up an hour of what have you done moments with our kids, like where we said, what have you done? What'd you do? Why'd you do that, right? I could tell you a lot of those stories. One of my favorites was just a couple months ago. My wife discovered this, and I went into the room to talk to Cohen about it. And this is a picture from his room, and that's right above his bed. And you see right there, there's this like hole in the wall. And he'd taken his finger, and I don't know if he thought he was in prison or something, just trying to tumble out of the house. But he just started digging through the wall. And I mean, you can't really tell because there's nothing to scale in here. And, but you know, you can basically take my little hand and just kind of go like this in it for about 8 or 9 inches. I mean, it's a really good hole, and it's going to require someone without my set of skills to you talking about? Talking about the hole in the wall. What hole in the wall? The hole in the wall, right there, right above your bed. I don't know anything about that. You didn't do this. No, I didn't do that. Really? Because this is your bed, right? Uh-huh. And this is your wall, right? Yeah. And that's your name right there, right? Yeah. What'd you do? I didn't do that. And listen, kids do stuff all the time that needs to be corrected, okay? And their posture and how they respond is everything. I mean, if they respond sort of humbly and they seek forgiveness and they're contrite, they don't need to know what that means, but we know what it means. If they're apologetic, if they're sorry, they know they did something wrong. As a parent, you sometimes want to operate a little bit differently than if they hadn't told the truth, right? My wife has come up with this killer line. I don't know where she learned it from, but please, if you have kids, steal it from her. It's amazing. When a kid acts like that, humbly, contrite, and they seek forgiveness, then sometimes we'll say, hey, listen, we're going to give you grace. Because mommy and daddy aren't perfect, and we make mistakes. And I appreciate how you responded and told the truth. And so because Jesus gives mommy and daddy grace, we're going to give you grace. It's a good line, right? But if they don't act like that, and they sort of try to keep towing the line and say, I didn't do it, and they're prideful and they push back, justice is going to roll down like a mighty river, right? And listen, I want to tell you, this is what I've learned about God. And I see it in the scriptures, and I understand it now as a parent. That is how God is with us. Grace is always available. It's always there. It's what we do with it that determines our life. Will we accept it? Will we be humble and seek forgiveness and be contrite? Because we are going to make mistakes. Or are we going to pridefully and arrogantly say, no, I got this figured out, God? We have a what have you done moment. Grace is available, but the response of the heart will dictate whether or not grace is extended to us. Saul makes excuses. He pushes back on Samuel. You can read it later on your own. He's prideful. He is not contrite. He's not humble. He does not seek forgiveness. He just tries to explain why he had to do what he did. Saul is not going to receive the grace that is available to him. And so Samuel just blows up on him, chastises him, and tells him this, and here comes the consequence, and this is way worse in a timeout. Listen, Samuel says this, you have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time, but now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought a man after his own heart. Who's that? David. And appointed him ruler of his people because you have kept the Lord's commands. Saul was the first anointed king. And until this what have you done moment, he was the one that was supposed to pass on his kingship and the lineage to Jesus Christ. But his kingship ends when he dies. And David becomes the king. And for good or bad, David's line is the one that 1,000 or so years later produces Jesus Christ. Now listen, I mean, there's some sovereignty stuff, there's some free will stuff, and there's some freedom stuff that we need to wrestle through in some statements like that. But listen, that's the truth. That's what the scripture teaches us. It should have been Saul, but instead it was David. Yet, and here's the thread of grace, listen to this. Samuel turns around, he walks the other way, doesn't make the sacrifice, and he walks the other way and he leaves the battlefield. And they go into battle. But listen, verse 23, on that day, the Lord saved Israel. Phrase right out of the Judges. That despite what Saul did, despite not having the priest give the sacrifice, God still gives grace to his people and saves them. God does it, not Saul and not Samuel. God graciously acts even then. Listen, some of you just need to hear this today. No matter what you've done, God's grace is still available for you. We've all had what have you done moments, right? Our city's full of them. South Oakland, South Side, come on. But it's not just parties and the lifestyle. It's walking in disobedience and things like purity, relationships, ethics, anger, pride. grace is bigger than what have you done. What have you done doesn't define who you become. What defines who we become is how we respond to God's grace. If we repent, if we're humble, if we seek mercy, if we open ourselves to counsel, if we grab hold of the thread of grace and we respond the way God tells us to respond. Unfortunately, Saul didn't do this. Things went from bad to worse. Another chapter of his life, much later, the very next story, Saul is trying to hear from God. He's trying to figure out what to do about an impending situation. And so he's trying to hear from God, and he can't. God's literally silent, it tells us. God is not speaking at all to Saul. Saul needed to listen to last week's sermon. Okay? And then listen. Because he can't hear from God, some of his closest advisors tell him this. Verse 36. Do whatever seems best to you. Ooh. Listen. You want to talk about a sign of trouble? It's when we're not hearing from God and people around us tell us to do what we think is right. Whatever we think we should do, we should just do that. And this, again, should remind us of the judges who did, right, often what was right in their own eyes. That was one of the themes of the judges. Again, we'll touch it next week. Saul has, at this point, severed his relationship with Samuel and replaced it with these counselors. Samuel is a mentor, a wise man of God, who is in his life to do two things: discourage the ways of man and encourage the ways of God. And he has replaced them with all these advisors who were close to him, who discourage the ways of God and encourage the ways of man. It's a real trouble spot in his life, same with each one of us. Now listen, what do you think Saul's going to do? Is he going to listen to his men? Is he going to just do whatever he wants? Well, I'll tell you what he's not going to do. He's not going to wait on God. Has he done that yet? Absolutely not. It's a pattern in his life. Saul is always going to run ahead of what God has for him. He's not going to listen to God. He doesn't like God's commands, his timelines, and his ways. He's the king, doggone it. I'm going to do what I want. And God can catch up to me. Listen, church, and this is important for us. Running ahead of God plants seeds of failure. Running ahead with God plants seeds of faithfulness. Which are you planting in your life? You're not going to bat 1,000. It's about planting seeds. Is it for failure or faithfulness? Saul, as I said, he chooses to just deliberately disobey God, do whatever he wants. And as this sort of is made known to Samuel and God, Samuel's already said goodbye. Samuel's already packed up on Saul. He's done. He already dropped the timeout, right? Said, your kingdom's done. I'm speaking on behalf of God. But now he's not going to get a smackdown. He's just going to get something that's really sad. And it's going to come from God. Listen, verse 11, chapter 15. After he does what he wants and listens to his men. God says this to Samuel about Saul. I regret that I have made Saul king because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Now listen, at the beginning of Saul's story, go back to this verse from chapter 17. When he comes to Samuel for the first time, this is what God says to Samuel about Saul then. The beginning of the story. This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. How does it go in 6 chapters from this is my guy, God saying to Samuel about Saul, to I regret making this my God? God saying the same thing to the same man about the same man. And what are we to make of God regretting? Is he changing his mind? I thought God was unchanging and faithful. What are we to do with this theologically? Well, first we have to understand the word regret. The Hebrew term here is nakam, and it's notoriously difficult, controversial, but generally what it means is to have regret, to relent, to change one's mind, and in the process to have pity or compassion, and to be sorry about what has happened. You see, I believe that when God regrets having made Saul king, it actually means that God is sorry, that he has compassion on Saul's situation, that he is grieving, that he has sent so much grace into Saul's life, and Saul has continued to reject his grace. And because of this pattern, eventually, God has rejected Saul in his kingship. God regrets say, okay, now I don't really understand the end times. What does Jesus say about it? Right? And he says a lot. I don't really understand the ways of the Spirit. What does Jesus say about it? He says a lot. What about creation? What about free will? What about sovereignty? What about healing? What about death? What about all these things? You go to Jesus and you say, okay, he's God on earth. He's the ultimate revelation. Okay? What does he say about it? What does he do with it? What does he interact? And we don't see Jesus use this Hebrew word, but we do see this idea of regret in two places at the end of his life. Jesus is standing over Jerusalem, two separate instances. Jerusalem, the city of God, the city of his people, the city of David, not Saul. And the first time, Luke 13, Jesus says this, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who were sent to her. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus is standing over Jerusalem saying, oh, Jerusalem, I've sent you so much grace. I've sent you prophets. You've killed them, and you're about to kill me too. You're going to reject me, and you of all people should have recognized me, and I would have gathered you together because I love you, and I have grace for you. And then later in the week, he's marching into his death right before Easter, Luke 19. When he drew near and he saw the city, Jesus wept over it, saying, would you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, and now they are hidden from your eyes. Jesus is saying, I'm going to make peace. I'm going to shed my blood. I'm going to be done with the sacrifices. We're going to be done with the priestly system. I'm going to take the penalty, and you're not going to get it. You're not going to see it. And all these other people are going to see it, and they're going to rush into the kingdom, and I'm going to gather them together. But how I regret, and I feel sorry, and I have compassion, and I'm weeping, just like I did for Saul, that you have rejected me. You see, grace is available, but Jesus longs for them and weeps for them, but he cannot make the decision for them. You go back to Saul, grace is available. God longs for Saul and weeps for Saul, but he can't make the decisions for him. And you come back to our lives as men and women, broken just like them. Grace is available. God longs for you. God weeps for you, but he cannot make decisions for you. This is the idea of free will, which I'm not going to get into. What I am going to do is I'm going to invite the band up. Dan and the team is going to come up, and they're going to get set on the stage. Because as Dennis was saying earlier, I just want to end the service just a little bit differently. I'm thinking about a nickname for Dennis. I ran my small group was sort of brainstorming this week. We're thinking Pastor Denny, if you guys could jump on board with that, it'd be great. I've already created an email alias, which is Big Breakfast Grand Slam at northway.org. So that will go directly to Dennis. I just needed a moment there to get the band up on stage, and I knew you wouldn't pay attention to anything I said, so we'll just talk about my friend Denny. So, listen, if you can. Saul started well, but he finished poorly. The turning moment in his life was his first "what have you done" moment. How would he act, right? Humbly, contritely, and he chose to reject God's grace. This "what have you done" moment in the New Testament, there's another sort of "what have you done" phrase. This is Saul, so the other Saul, who meets Jesus. He's blinded. He's renamed Paul. He writes a third of the New Testament. And he's writing to a church in a place called Galatia. And they're having some trouble. They're just walking in disobedience. They're losing track of the ways of God, and they're sort of leaning on their own hearts and their own spirit. He corrects them. And you'll see sort of this "what have you done" question. It's right in here. Galatians 5:7. You can do this later on your own. He says this, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? I mean, he might as well say, what'd you do? Who hindered you from obeying the truth? For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. That's Paul's term for our own heart and our own spirit, where our sin sits. Paul says, hey guys, you're not using your freedom to cultivate the ways of God and his spirit in your life. What have you done? You were going so well. You were running a great race. You were crushing it. Who cut in on you? Who pushed you back? What happened? What'd you do? And whether it's the king, Saul, it's the Galatians, or it's us, listen, constant in our lives is that we're going to have these moments. The constant is our